Once you build software, it stays in place usually for as long as possible.
When you walk into an organization that's never done DevOps, what's day one look like?
Transformation is a culture change, and really for a culture change to be effective, everybody has to change to some degree. And so it's the person who is allowed to say, I don't have to change. That's where really the seeds of most of the failures I see come from.
With over 20 years in the trenches of software, Thomas Stiehm is the CTO of Coveros, leading software delivery through Agile, DevOps, and modern testing practices while guiding teams to balance speed, quality, cost, and risk.
Our environments are so complex now that trying to track everything, if there's any kind of manual component to that at all, is overwhelming and things are missed. And so the organizations that have done CMDB the best are the ones where they are constantly adding more automation to track the things they want to track. And even then, it's still hard.
You co-authored an academic paper. What did you actually test and what surprised you?
One of the most surprising things is that
Welcome back to Automate or Die Trying. I'm your host, Will Ramos, and today I'm sitting down with Thomas Stiehm. Thomas has just wrapped up a 17-year run as CTO at Coveros, and I mean just wrapped up in the last month. So we're catching up with him at an inflection point. During the nearly 2-decade stretch, he helped organizations figure out how to ship software faster without burning down the house. DevOps, DevSecOps, Agile at scale, cloud adoption. He's been in the trenches on all of it. What caught my attention with Thomas was he co-authored recently an academic research on using large language models to automate BDD test formulations. So he's not just talking about AI in the software cycle. He's actually actively testing what works and publishing the results. Thomas, welcome to the show.
thank you. It's great to be here.
Good. Literally, you just stepped out of the CTO seat the last month after 17 years. What is it like being on the other side of that? Are you sleeping better, or are you already itching to build something new?
Yeah, I mean, there are, like leaving anything, there are good things and bad things about it. It certainly is a transition that I'm going through, and I look to do something exciting on the other side.
Awesome. So let's rewind a little bit. Your career spans some pivotal moments in tech, right? Y2K remediation at George Mason, building SaaS platforms for $35 million AOL users, running global agile transformations across continents, and architecting systems that handle billions in transactions at Fannie Mae. You were doing Y2K remediation in 1999. You lived through what might have been the original automate or die moment, right? Um, how did that experience shape how you think about risk, deadlines, and automation today?
Um, that's a good question. I don't know that I've ever thought of it that way. I think a lot of it gets down to being ready and prepared, and look at the assumptions you make when you build software. So the assumption people made when they built software that had the Y2K problem was all this software will be replaced before Y2K ever happens. And that just wasn't true.
Yeah.
What we know now is that once you build software, it stays in place usually for as long as possible. And so there were just lots of systems that were built, 20, 30 years before Y2K that worked. No one saw any reason to replace them. And then all of a sudden we had this crisis with Y2K where people said, well, this stuff's going to fail now. And we had to go back and fix it. So I really learned from a risk point of view, understand your assumptions. And you have to, if you build successful software, it's going to be around for a long time.
Absolutely. Now, at Digital Focus, you led an agile transformation for a Fortune 500 company with teams that split between the U.S. and Bangalore.
Mm.
Um, that was in the early 2000s, right? Way before distributed work was mainstream. What did you learn about making Agile work across cultures and time zones that applies today?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to get down to, in order to work well with other people, you have to understand where they're coming from and kind of their thinking. Um, and that particular project, one of the things that they had done is they had taken some people who had moved to the US, lived in the US for a while, so they kind of understood American culture a little better, and then had decided for personal reasons to move back to India, so they could help bridge that gap. They understood a lot of the things that, Americans, and I'm sure this is true of every culture, have a lot of, like, idioms and colloquialisms that we say that we don't think about at all,
Right.
but if you didn't grow up in that culture, you don't really understand them because 'cause they're referencing things you aren't familiar with. And so communication is key, and then,
Hmm.
one of the things that they actually did poorly on with that specific project is that all of the data centers were on the East Coast of the United States, and so there was a big lag
Mm.
between, Bangalore and the East Coast of the United States, so if you remoted into one of their Linux systems, that was a more than a 1-second round trip for every keystroke,
Wow.
and that's a lot if you're typing.
Hey.
Most people type 30, 40 or more characters per second or even words per second or minute, I mean, so, that was something I had to get to. So the learning out of that is that you need to make your systems, particularly the critical systems that teams depend on, um, equal access and make sure that everyone can access them in a reasonable amount of time, right? So for distributed systems to work, good communication and reasonable access to tools, and fair access to tools have been, important things that I learned out of that.
Hmm. Now you built a SaaS platform managing marketing campaigns for like 35 million AOL members.
Yep.
What did you learn about building for scale that you still carry with you today?
I think the big thing with that is that at the time, so that was for, the group that did member marketing for AOL, and so everything that we did had to fit within what they called, login rate. So people would go to AOL and they'd log in, and everything had to happen within, a second in
Mm.
order to not have them feel like their login was slow. And we weren't the only thing that had to run in that login rate. So there was a lot of testing, particularly performance testing, to make sure that, we were doing everything we needed to supply the marketing campaigns to the members, within that time frame. And so that
Yeah.
was probably the big thing with things at scale, is that you have to understand the performance characteristics at scale, because you can make something when you're the only person testing it seem fast that, you know, I think the login rate was, 3,000 logins a second that
Wow.
you had to test against. And so that going from one person logging in occasionally as you're testing it to literally the process running 3,000 times a second, huge difference. And
Yeah.
things that seem fast in one time frame could just fall down at that load.
Yeah. That's back then when they had those baud modems, right? 56K modems and whatnot.
Yeah. But
Mm.
you still had to log in really, there were still so many logins that you had to really performance test that or it would just fall over.
Yeah. Now let's get into the meat of it, right? Well, you spent years helping organizations adopt DevOps and DevSecOps, um, not just for the tooling, but the culture and practices. And you've been on the training side too, right? Teaching at Coveros training, building a DevOps army. Um, Now, as far as when you're building the DevOps army and training developers, testers, and ops to work together on like a CI/CD and infrastructure as code, you've really taught courses on this, right?
Mhm.
When you walk into an organization um, that's never done DevOps, what's day one look like?
It's usually, I mean, so day 1, you're setting expectations and trying to ground people in what, DevOps is, what they should expect out of it, um, what a transition might look like, and then then you branch from there into dealing with people's exceptions to wanting to change, right? So any transformation you do, there's a lot of people who object to making that change.
Mm-hmm.
People by their nature often don't like new things or don't like things where they fear they're going to lose control and authority.
Yeah.
And so you have to understand where they're coming from, what their objections are, and help them understand how to deal with the change or why that objection isn't going to come to pass with the change, and get them comfortable with the reason we're doing this is to improve our processes, get more value out of our software and our software processes, but you're still going to have the control and the assurances you need to be able to do your job.
Now, what do you say is the hardest mindset to change, right? Like developers, ops, or leadership. You've seen you've seen this fail, right? So, what would you say that would be?
Um, I wouldn't put it into like a level category. I've seen transformations fail at all different levels. It's the person who is allowed to say, "I don't have to change." And so sometimes that's the developers, sometimes that's the operations people, sometimes that's leadership. And so a transformation is a culture change, and there are some people who, at the end of the day, what they're asking you when you come in to do a DevOps transformation is go fix them, but I don't need to change.
Hmm.
And really, for a culture change to be effective, everybody has to change to some degree.
Yeah.
And so it's the person who is allowed to say, I don't have to change. And that's
Now,
where really the seeds of most of the failures I see come from.
man, how do you measure that success metric?
I think it gets down to, there are definitely, I mean, there's like DORA metrics that you could look at. There's the
Hmm.
space metrics you could look at, and then there's the, you know, if you're talking to the people and doing things like retrospectives or something like that, you might have surveys and their reactions to those. But sometimes it gets down to, are we delivering software that the users get value out of? And are we delivering value into the user's hands sooner and figuring out ways to measure those kinds of things? And some of those can be hard to measure. So it takes a commitment from the organization to actually understand where they're at now, understand where they want to go, and then how we measure that with the customers as we're making that change.
Hmm. So now let's add security into this, right? Into this puzzle
Mhm.
that you call DevSecOps, right? You've done a lot of work with GitHub Advanced Security and Copilot. Um, yeah, you've even have a video out there, Excel and AppSec with GitHub Advanced Security and Copilot. Um, Walk us through how you actually integrate security into high velocity pipelines without turning every PR into a security review.
Well, I think the first place you have to start with is understanding what your security posture is now. So I've worked with applications where the first time they've ever run anything to give them an idea of their security posture, that initial scan was 2 years in development. So 2 years in development on a Java Enterprise Edition application with 4 million lines of code, and the first scan you run, you're gonna see a lot of things, and it's gonna be overwhelming. So ideally, you wanna start, when the project's starting so that you're incorporating understanding your security posture and what findings you're going to have immediately so you can make remediating those things be part of the regular process the developers do,
Hmm.
so that it doesn't become overwhelming. Now, if some of the successful organizations that started later on and had what I would call an overwhelming amount of findings, the way they dealt with that was having teams whose goal it was to go in and start remediating those and fixing those. Now you have to couple that with training the rest of the team to be able to write secure code. So defensive practices, understanding, why you can't do some things. Like we've known about SQL injection for almost as long as we've known about SQL and have been using SQL, but people today are still writing code that has SQL injection vulnerabilities, because that's not a standard thing people are taught. How to understand about SQL injection, how to deal with injection into your dynamic SQL, and why you should avoid dynamic SQL unless you are actively trying to remediate that problem.
Yeah, and everybody now is talking about shift left, and but what does that actually look like when it's working? Just give me like the boring operational details.
Yeah. So, most of the shift left we do, what it looks like is that we start, doing things like even before we write code, we do things like threat modeling and
Mm,
architecture analysis to understand who might be attacking us, why they might be attacking us. What is it about us that they want? Bearing in mind that a lot of the attacks you see now are may not because you have anything of value they know about. It's you know, a lot of malware, people who use malware attacks, ransomware attacks, do it because we either want you to pay us money or we want you to be a jumping off point for someone else. The other thing you see are people who are attacking anyone to see if they can start using their servers or their cloud accounts for crypto mining.
yeah, absolutely.
And so everyone's a target. If you're on the internet, you're a target. Understand that you are a target, and then start doing things like setting up code scanning, whether that's your source code or doing dynamic application scanning. I mean, even something like Sonar Cube with the security rules turned on is going to be it's going to give you more security information than not doing anything. Right. So that's kind of the baseline. And then you want to start factoring in other security scanning tools, things that look at your code base at a deeper level.
Mhm.
Um, either setting up dynamic testing tools or setting up proxies that will do some of that dynamic testing as you do either your automated testing or your manual testing on your application to start collecting information. Starting doing tools that will look at your dependencies and tell you if you have known vulnerabilities in your dependencies. So
Mhm.
with OWASP and some of the tools that they have, setting all these things up, they're all open source tools. You can set them up and at no cost to acquire the tools and put those into your processes and start getting value out of those and starting to reduce the kind of the attack surface that your software exposes to it, the attackers.
What's the one security practice that you'd never skip, right? Even if your CEO is breathing down your neck about a deadline.
At this point, I'd probably say your software composition analysis (SCA), where you're looking at the vulnerabilities, known vulnerabilities in your dependencies and your transient dependencies.
Yeah.
A lot of the tools that exist that are used by attackers who are just automating everything depend on finding people who have those vulnerabilities. It's still in their code base.
Yes, absolutely. Now, in the world of AI, right, and the software life cycle, um, let's talk about your research, right? You co-authored an academic paper, comprehensive evaluation and insights into the use of large language models in the automation of behavior-driven development acceptance test formulation.
Mhm.
That's not a blog post, right? That's the peer-reviewed research, right? So,
Yeah.
what did you actually test, uh, and what surprised you on the results of that test?
Probably one of the most surprising things is that, if you um, learn how to properly prompt and work with an LLM, they can give you really good tests, right? So the goal of that is to use your language models to help you do things like figure out um, we should be testing based on the requirements, even writing some of those tests, and then validating the tests. So, I mean, it's using the language model to help you do all those things so that you're not staring at a blank slate. So, and I think it was surprising that it actually can work pretty well as long as you spend some time thinking about what your prompt should be, and then with all generative AI, you need to spend some time and validate the output and make sure it is what you're looking for.
Okay, so that's where they surprisingly succeeded, right? So how about as far as fail? Where did they fall flat during your tests?
I mean, so they usually fall flat in that if you don't give it enough context, enough
Mhm.
information, it's I don't know if making an assumption is the right word, but since it's the LLMs are meant to give you a response back, it will give you a response back and it'll seem very confident, but without the right information, it's going to give you things that don't make sense or even worse, sometimes they seem like they're right and they're going to be good for you and then they just don't work. It's
Yeah.
either, it's testing the wrong thing, it's making the wrong assumption about what the right answer would be. So
Mhm.
you're doing a test, maybe you're even passing, but the thing that you're testing isn't right.
Mm, absolutely. Now, where do you see AI fitting into the DevSecOps pipeline, say in the next 2 to 3 years, and beyond the hype? Where do you see those?
Yeah, I mean, some of the places getting back to GitHub and GitHub Advanced Security, so they've integrated Copilot into Gas, and one of the things it can do is
Mhm.
help you understand what your vulnerabilities are and help you understand how to remediate those, and even some of the vulnerabilities it can um, suggest auto fixes that are actually effective and work pretty well. So with with the right amount of information, finding the problem, having enough information in its training set and on the internet to know how to remediate those, you can really reduce the time it takes to remediate problems.
Mm.
Things that might take a couple of hours to remediate can get down into a couple of minutes. Now uh, you know, it doesn't always work that fast, but it works that fast enough so that it's a big productivity boost.
Now, do you see, I mean, as far as the tooling, right? How does your DevSecOps change when you're dealing with constrained devices that can't run traditional security tooling?
So a lot of the security tooling can run, on another computer against those constrained devices. So it depends on what interfaces and what kind of application surface you have with those devices.
Hmm.
Um, the things that are completely offline, you might not be able to do a lot of security testing with those if they're constrained and offline. But at the same time, if they're constrained offline, then you don't necessarily have to. That's more physical security problems
Right.
then.
Right.
The things that are online but are constraint devices, you generally attack from the outside in. So if it's got a web interface, you'd use some kind of dynamic application security tool to test that. Um, if it's got some kind of like web service, you can use those same kind of tools. If it's
Hmm.
got some other protocol that it's running, you most likely would have to figure out how to use that protocol to test it and look at the security um, requirements that you have and how you might try to break those. So the more standard an interface you can test it with, the more tool support you're going to have.
Yeah. Now, obviously 17 years as a CTO, you've seen tech hype cycles come and go, probably watch organizations succeed and fail at transformations. Um, what's the hardest trade-off you've had to make between speed, security, and reliability? And what would you make? Would you make the same call today?
I would say probably the hardest trade-offs have usually been the ones where we end up failing because we've made the wrong trade-off. So I've certainly seen times where we didn't think that the software was secure, but there was a lot of pressure to publish it anyway because there was some feature that the business wanted. And so we made that trade-off, and then almost by Murphy's Law, the thing happened, and we then had to go back up and clean things up. From the organizations I've worked with, I haven't had the things that I haven't been part of one of those really large goes on the news reports types of things for security incidences. Um, but there's still a lot of work, and then there's a lot of follow up on why did this happen, and if we knew that this was a problem, why didn't we do something else?
Now, if you were to start a DevSecOps program from zero today, Greenfield, no legacy, what's the first principle or practice you'd implement?
I'm going to make the assumption that you're talking also about a Greenfield application.
Yes.
So I would start with threat modeling and understanding, the thing that we're making is something of value. It's protecting something of value. There's some assets we're protecting. So, what are those things? Who would attack them? Why would they attack them? Given the technology stack we're going to use, how would they attack them? So that we can then start thinking about how do we have compensating controls in the application we're building so that we can mitigate some of those threats to begin with. And then as we build the software, I'd start factoring in, scanning, static application security testing, scanning, dynamic application security testing, scanning. And then I'd also include part of our testing would be testing the security features of the software to make sure that they work just like you would test any feature of the software. And then finally, penetration testing, getting people who are experts at exploiting complicated systems, seeing if they can exploit that system and what they'd have to go through to do that so that we can learn more about its security posture and fix those things.
What do you think? I mean, in my experience, there's two things that most companies struggle with. One is their CMDB, and the other is threat modeling. Why do you think those two things are just companies can't grasp?
Threat modeling is one of those things that it's a great idea, but it takes time and effort, and unless you have people who know how to do threat modeling, you can do it and not have a lot of good results and feel that you're not getting value out of it.
Right.
And so, busy organizations, and most organizations are busy, when they feel they're not getting value out of something, they just stop doing it.
Mm.
So I think that's CMDB, I think, is our environments are so complex now that trying to track everything, if there's any kind of manual component to that at all, just is overwhelming and things are missed. And so the organizations I've worked with that have done CMDB the best are the ones where, they are constantly adding more automation to track the things they want to track. And, whether that's onboarding or retiring things, it's all automation to track that. And even then, it's still hard.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you've trained thousands of people, consulted for some of the biggest organizations in the world, and published academic research. Distill it down. What's the one belief or lesson you'd pass on to leaders trying to move fast without breaking things?
I think the biggest thing that we lack in the industry is the idea that we need test automation to have confidence that our software continues to work, it continues to be high quality, continues to have security, and that a lot of organizations, they've learned how to do continuous integration. A lot of them have learned how to do continuous delivery, but that final piece of a build pipeline where we have test automation that gives us the confidence we need to continue to move fast and know that we haven't broken at least core functionality, is still something we're developing.
So, Thomas, where can people follow your work or reach out to you if they want to connect?
I'm on LinkedIn,
Mhm.
so that's a great place to reach out to me to connect. And I will soon have, I believe, some new announcements about the next things that I'm doing.
Awesome. Looking forward to it. So, Thomas, thanks for coming on. 2 decades of real experience, real lessons. That's what this show's about, right? So if this conversation helped you think differently about DevSecOps, automation, or building teams that move fast securely, share with someone who builds. Subscribe wherever you get your podcast and follow us on LinkedIn for clips, guest announcements, and behind the scenes content. This has been Automate or Die Trying. Until next time, thank you.